That was the last thing Mrs. Priscilla Sterling said before she made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was just kicking a young black girl out of a first-class suite to make room for her designer handbags. She thought her platinum status and her husband's money made her untouchable. But she didn't know who she was talking to. She didn't know that the girl in the oversized hoodie wasn't just a passenger. She was the reason this plane was allowed to fly at all. Seconds later, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, trembling with fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are grounding the aircraft immediately." What happens next isn't just justice, it's total destruction. You need to see this. The rain battered the windows of JFK Terminal 4, turning the tarmac into a blur of grey and silver. Inside the exclusive Polaris lounge, however, the world was warm, quiet, and smelled of espresso and expensive leather. Jordan Banks adjusted the hood of her charcoal sweatshirt, pulling it further over her noise-cancelling headphones. At 24, with her braids pulled back into a loose bun and wearing faded leggings and scuffed sneakers, she didn't look like the other patrons in the lounge. She didn't look like she belonged in the same zip code as them. Most people glanced at her and assumed she was someone's assistant, or perhaps a lucky contest winner. Jordan didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it. In the high-stakes world of venture capital and aerospace engineering, invisibility was a superpower. It allowed her to observe, to think, and to move without the suffocating weight of expectations. She glanced at her phone. A text from her chief legal officer, David, popped up. Acquisition finalized at 0900 hours. The ink is dry. Congratulations, boss. Jordan allowed herself a small, tired smile. It had been a grueling 6 months of negotiations, but it was done. She just wanted to get home to London, sleep for 12 hours, and maybe eat a bowl of cereal in her pajamas. She picked up her backpack, a battered thing that had traveled with her since her days coding in her dorm room at MIT, and headed for the gate. She was flying Vanguard Airways Flight 882 to Heathrow. She had treated herself to Seat 1A, the flagship suite. It wasn't just a seat. It was a fully enclosed pod with a sliding door, a bed, and the privacy she desperately needed. When she boarded the plane, the flight was already chaotic. The air outside was humid, and the mood inside the cabin was tense. The flight attendants looked harried, rushing back and forth with pre-flight drinks. Jordan kept her head down, clutching her boarding pass. Seat 1A. Just a few more steps, and she could close the sliding door and shut out the world. But when she reached the front of the cabin, she stopped dead. The sliding door to Suite 1A was open, and inside a woman was already settled. She looked to be in her late 50s, with a stiff blonde blowout that defied gravity, and a tweed Chanel jacket that probably cost more than most people's cars. She was spread out comfortably, sipping a glass of champagne. Next to her, occupying the massive amount of legroom, were 3 large Louis Vuitton carry-on bags and a barking Pomeranian in a rhinestone-studded carrier. Jordan blinked, confused. She checked her ticket again. Seat 1A. "Excuse me," Jordan said softly, leaning into the suite. The woman didn't even look up from her iPad. She flicked her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "Economy is in the back, dear. Keep moving. You're blocking the aisle." Jordan took a breath, keeping her voice calm. "I think there's a mistake. This is my seat. Seat 1A. The woman, Priscilla Sterling, finally looked up. Her eyes, icy blue and rimmed with heavy eyeliner, scanned Jordan from head to toe. She took in the hoodie, the leggings, the sneakers. A sneer curled her lip, a look of pure, unfiltered disgust. "Don't be ridiculous," Priscilla scoffed, her voice loud enough to carry through the first-class cabin. This is a $5,000 suite. Does it look like I'm in the wrong seat? Or does it look like you are lost? I have my boarding pass right here, Jordan said, holding out her phone. If you could just check yours, I'm sure we can clear this up. Priscilla laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I don't need to check anything. I am a Diamond Medallion member. My husband is the CEO of Sterling Logistics. I sit where I want. Now get out of my face before I call the flight attendant and have you arrested for harassment. Jordan felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't embarrassment. It was the slow, simmering burn of injustice she had felt 1,000 times before. The assumption that she couldn't possibly belong. Ma'am, I paid for this seat, Jordan said, her voice hardening slightly. Please move. Priscilla set down her champagne glass with a sharp clink. Oh, you paid for it. With what food stamps? Stolen credit cards. The cabin went silent. Several passengers in seats 2A and 1F lowered their magazines to watch. A businessman in 2F looked uncomfortable but said nothing. I'm asking you nicely, one last time, Jordan said, her eyes locking onto Priscilla's. Move! Priscilla reached up and pressed the call button repeatedly, her manicured nail digging into the plastic. Stewardess, stewardess, I am being assaulted. A flight attendant named Todd came rushing down the aisle. He was tall, flustered, and clearly already having a bad day. He took one look at the scene, the wealthy white woman in Chanel clutching her pearls, and the young black girl in a hoodie standing in the aisle, and made a snap judgment. What is the problem here? Todd asked, stepping between them. He turned his back to Jordan, addressing Priscilla with an apologetic smile. Mrs. Sterling, is everything all right? Can I get you a refill? This person, Priscilla spat, pointing a shaking finger at Jordan, is harassing me. She's trying to scam her way into my seat. She claims she has a ticket. Can you believe the audacity? Todd turned around to face Jordan. His smile vanished, replaced by a stern, authoritative scowl. Miss, let me see your boarding pass. Jordan held out her phone. I'm in 1A. She's in my seat. Todd glanced at the screen. It clearly read Jordan Banks, seat 1A. He frowned, looking from the phone to Priscilla, then back to Jordan. He hesitated. The ticket was valid. But Priscilla Sterling was a frequent flyer, a high-value customer according to the manifest, and she was already seated and drinking. Moving her would cause a scene. Moving the girl in the hoodie seemed easier. There seems to be a double booking, Todd lied smoothly. He didn't even check his tablet. It happens sometimes. Glitches in the system. It's not a glitch, Jordan said firmly. I booked this ticket 2 weeks ago. Look. Todd sighed, dropping his customer service voice. He leaned in closer to Jordan, lowering his voice to a patronizing whisper. Mrs. Sterling is a very important client of Vanguard Airways. She's already settled. I can't ask her to move just because the computer made an error. So you're asking me to move? Jordan asked, raising an eyebrow. I can find you a seat in Economy Plus, Todd offered, as if he were doing her a massive favor. You'll have extra legroom, and I'll throw in a meal voucher. Jordan laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You want me to downgrade from a private suite to economy because she doesn't want to move. Do you realize how illegal that is? Don't talk to me about laws, Todd snapped, his patience fraying. I am the lead flight attendant. I decide who sits where for the safety and order of the flight. You are causing a disturbance. I'm causing a disturbance. Jordan stepped back, gesturing to Priscilla, who was now feeding her dog a piece of smoked salmon from the pre-flight tray. She's the one screaming. She belongs here. Todd said the words slipping out before he could catch them. The silence that followed was heavy. Even Priscilla looked a little surprised he had said it out loud, though she smirked in satisfaction. "Excuse me," Jordan whispered. "She belongs here." Todd flushed red. "I meant her ticket status. Look, miss, you have two choices. Take the seat in 24B or get off the plane. We depart in 10 minutes. I don't have time for this." Jordan looked at Todd. She looked at Priscilla, who was now ignoring her again, scrolling through her iPad with a smug grin. She looked at the other passengers, who were all averting their eyes, refusing to intervene. Jordan took a deep breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a second phone, a sleek black satellite phone that looked nothing like a standard iPhone. "I'm not taking 24B, Jordan said calmly. "And I'm not getting off the plane. But you're right about one thing, Todd. This plane isn't going anywhere." "Put that phone away," Todd ordered, pointing at her. "You cannot make calls during pre-flight checks." "I can make this call," Jordan said. She dialed a single number. "I'm calling the captain," Todd warned, grabbing the intercom handset on the wall. "Captain, I have a disruptive passenger in first class. She's refusing to follow crew instructions." Priscilla chuckled, sipping her drink. "Goodbye, sweetheart. Enjoy the bus ride home." Jordan held the phone to her ear. It rang once. "Director Vance," a deep voice answered on the other end. It was the director of operations for JFK Airport. "Vance, it's Jordan," she said, her voice cutting through the cabin noise like a razor. Todd froze. He had just heard the name, but it didn't register yet. "Jordan!" The director's voice shifted instantly from professional to deferential. "Ms. Banks, is everything okay? I thought you were wheels up." "I'm not," Jordan said, staring directly at Priscilla. "I'm currently being denied my paid seat on Vanguard 882 because the lead flight attendant thinks I don't belong in first class. He's trying to move me to economy to accommodate a Mrs. Priscilla Sterling." There was a pause on the line, a terrifying pause. "He's doing what?" Vance asked. "I want the manifest pulled," Jordan said. "And Vance, I want a full ramp freeze on this aircraft. Nobody comes on, nobody goes off, and this bird doesn't move an inch until I say so." Todd laughed nervously. "Who is she talking to, her boyfriend?" "Done," Vance said. "I'm patching in the tower now." Jordan hung up the phone. She looked at Todd, who was smirking at her, shaking his head. "Nice performance," Todd said. "But I'm afraid you're out of time. Security is on their way." Suddenly the plane lurched. Not forward, but a sudden jarring halt as the tug vehicle that was preparing to push them back slammed on its brakes. The engines, which had been humming to life, spooled down into an eerie silence. The lights in the cabin flickered and went to full bright. "What's happening?" Priscilla asked, looking around annoyed. "Why did the air conditioning stop?" The captain's voice came over the intercom, but he didn't sound like the confident pilot from before. He sounded confused, scared. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller. We have just been ordered by the tower to hold our position immediately. They've shut down the taxiway." Todd's face went pale. He looked at Jordan. She was just standing there, her arms crossed, waiting. "You really shouldn't have done that," Jordan said to him, her voice dangerously low. "Now you've made me late." The silence in the first-class cabin was suffocating. The air conditioning had cut out when the engines died, and the humidity of the New York summer was beginning to creep into the plane. Captain Miller stormed out of the cockpit. He was a large man, with silver hair and the demeanor of someone who hadn't been told no since flight school in the 80s. He looked at the confusion in the galley. Todd looking pale, Priscilla looking annoyed, and Jordan standing calmly with her arms crossed. "What in the hell is going on back here?" Miller barked, his voice booming. "Tower has completely red-lighted us. They're saying there's a level 5 security hold on this specific aircraft. Do you know what that costs us per minute?" Todd, seeing an opportunity to save his own skin, immediately pointed a shaking finger at Jordan. "It's her captain." "She's the problem." Todd stammered, his voice rising an octave. "She refused to take her assigned seat in economy. She's been belligerent, aggressive, and she made a threat." Jordan's eyes widened slightly. "I did no such thing." "She did," Priscilla chimed in, adjusting the diamond collar on her Pomeranian. "I heard her. She was on that little burner phone of hers talking to some gang member or something. She said she was going to shut this bird down. Sounds like a hijacking threat to me." The captain turned his glare on Jordan. He saw the hoodie, the braids, the sneakers. He didn't see the person. He saw the profile. He saw a threat. "Is that true?" Miller demanded, stepping into Jordan's personal space. "Did you threaten my aircraft? I spoke to the airport director." Jordan said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I told him to ground the plane because your lead flight attendant is violating federal aviation regulations by denying a ticketed passenger their seat based on discrimination." "Discrimination," Todd scoffed, finding his courage again, now that the captain was backing him. "Captain, she's delusional. Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in seat 1A? I offered her a generous compensation to move, and she threatened to blow up the deal. I mean, blow up the situation." It was a slip of the tongue, but Todd saw the captain's eyes widen. He decided to double down. "Actually, Captain, now that I think about it, she used the word bomb." The air left the room. The businessman in 2F gasped. Priscilla let out a theatrical shriek, clutching her chest. "She has a bomb!" Priscilla screamed, looking at the other passengers. "She's a terrorist." "Get her off. She's going to kill us all." Jordan stared at Todd in disbelief. "Are you insane? There are cameras in this cabin. You are lying on a federal record. I don't take chances with my ship." Captain Miller said, his face turning purple. He grabbed his radio. "Tower, this is Vanguard 882. We have a potential localized threat in the cabin, requesting immediate law enforcement assistance. We need an extraction. Copy that 882. Port Authority police are already ascending the stairs." Jordan didn't move. She didn't shout. She just looked at Todd with a gaze so cold it should have frozen the sweat on his forehead. "You just ended your career, Todd, and you—" She looked at the captain. "You just made yourself an accomplice to a felony false report." "Sit down and shut up," Miller yelled. "Hands where I can see them." Moments later, the cabin door flew open. 3 Port Authority police officers stormed in, hands on their holsters. They were large, imposing, and clearly ready for a fight. "Where is the subject?" the lead officer, a burly man named Sergeant Davies, shouted. "There," Todd pointed at Jordan. "She made a bomb threat. She's refusing to deplane." Sergeant Davies didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for ID. He lunged forward, grabbing Jordan by the arm and twisting it behind her back. "Ow! I'm not resisting!" Jordan cried out as the handcuffs clicked tight against her wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," Davies barked, shoving her toward the door. "Get her out of here!" Priscilla yelled, throwing a crumpled napkin at Jordan as she was dragged past. "Trash. Absolute trash." As they reached the door of the plane, Jordan stopped. She planted her feet. "Officer," she said calmly to Davies. "Check my pocket. My back left pocket." "Shut up," Davies grunted. "Check the pocket," Jordan insisted. "There is a black ID card there. If you drag me off this plane in cuffs without checking that card, you will lose your pension, I guarantee it." Davies hesitated. There was something in her voice, not fear, not anger, but pure, unadulterated authority. He glanced at his partner, then reached into her back pocket. He pulled out a slim, matte black card. It wasn't a driver's license. It wasn't a credit card. It was a government-issued credential with a holographic eagle and a gold chip. Below her name, it read, "Civil Aviation Oversight Board, Level 1. Clearance, do not detain. Direct line to Homeland Security." Davies froze. He looked at the card, then at Jordan, then back at the card. His face went from red to a ghostly white. "Is this real?" he whispered. "Scan it," Jordan said, "and then uncuff me before I have your badge number." Davies swallowed hard. He hurriedly unlocked the cuffs. "Ma'am, we were told there was a bomb threat." "There is no bomb," Jordan said, rubbing her wrists. "There is only a racist flight attendant and a pilot who doesn't check his facts. Now step aside. We are going to wait right here." "Wait for what?" Captain Miller asked, stepping out of the cockpit, confused as to why the terrorist was no longer in cuffs. "For the owner," Jordan said. 10 minutes passed. The plane was stiflingly hot. The passengers in economy were starting to shout, demanding to know why the AC was off and why the doors were open. In first class, Priscilla was fanning herself with a safety card, complaining loudly to anyone who would listen. "This is incompetent," she wailed. "I am going to sue this airline. I want that girl in prison." Todd was pacing in the galley, nervously checking his watch. Why hadn't the police taken her away? Why were the officers standing guard around her, facing the crew as if protecting her? Then the sound of heavy footsteps came from the jet bridge. A man in a sharp navy suit walked onto the plane. He was followed by 2 other men in suits and a woman carrying a briefcase. The first man was Mr. Henderson, the regional vice president of Vanguard Airways. He looked like he had just run a marathon, sweaty, breathless, and terrified. "Mr. Henderson," Todd exclaimed, rushing forward with a relieved smile. "Thank God you're here. We've had a terrible situation with a disruptive passenger." Henderson didn't even look at Todd. He shoulder-checked him out of the way, nearly knocking the flight attendant into the beverage cart. Henderson walked straight to Jordan, who was leaning against the bulkhead, checking her phone. To the shock of everyone on board, the regional vice president of the airline bowed his head. "Ms. Banks," Henderson said, his voice trembling, I am mortified. I got here as fast as I could from the admin building." "You took 12 minutes, Henderson," Jordan said, not looking up from her screen. "The average response time for a code red is supposed to be 7. Traffic, ma'am. The terminal it's gridlocked." Henderson was wiping sweat from his brow. "Please tell me what we can do to rectify this." Captain Miller stepped forward, looking confused. "Mr. Henderson, you know this passenger." Henderson spun around, his eyes blazing with fury. "Know her. Know her. You idiot. Do you know who signs your paycheck?" "Vanguard Airways," Miller said slowly. "And do you know who bought Vanguard Airways this morning at 9:00 a.m.? Henderson screamed. "The Apex Group?" The cabin went silent. Even Priscilla stopped fanning herself. Henderson gestured to Jordan. "This is Jordan Banks, CEO and founder of the Apex Group. She doesn't just own the seat she paid for. As of this morning, she owns this plane, this gate, and your entire pathetic career." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the fizz of the champagne settling in Priscilla's glass. Todd felt his knees give out. He grabbed the counter for support. "Owned," he squeaked. Jordan finally looked up. She pushed off the wall and walked slowly toward Todd. She didn't look like a girl in a hoodie anymore. She looked like a shark circling a wounded seal. "I acquired Vanguard because I saw potential," Jordan said, her voice carrying through the silent cabin. "I thought the fleet was good. I thought the routes were solid. But I had heard rumors about the culture, about the way certain preferred customers were treated and how others were treated." She turned her gaze to Priscilla. "I decided to fly commercial today incognito to see if the rumors were true." Jordan lied smoothly. She hadn't planned it, but it was the perfect narrative. "I wanted to see how my new employees treated a young black woman traveling alone." She turned back to Todd. "And Todd, you gave me quite a show." "Ms. Banks, please." Todd stammered, tears forming in his eyes. "I didn't know. If I had known who you were, that's the problem." Jordan snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "If you had known I was a billionaire, you would have treated me like a human being. But because you thought I was nobody, you treated me like garbage. You lied to the police. You accused me of a felony. You tried to ruin my life because you didn't like the way I looked." Jordan turned to the police officers. "Sergeant Davies." "Yes, ma'am," Davies said, snapping to attention. "I'd like to file charges against this man for filing a false police report and endangerment." Todd let out a sob. "Please know I have a family." "And what about my family?" Jordan asked coldly. "What would my mother have felt if she got a call saying her daughter was in federal prison because of you?" She turned to Captain Miller. The captain was pale, staring at his shoes. "Captain Miller," Jordan said, "you're the commander of this vessel. Your job is to assess threats. You let a flight attendant manipulate you into calling a SWAT team on a paying customer without a shred of evidence. You didn't even ask to see my ticket." I followed protocol," Miller whispered weakly. "No," Jordan said. "You followed your prejudice. Pack your bags, Captain. You're relieved of duty. Effective immediately." "You can't do that," Miller protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "I have a union." "I own the airline," Jordan reminded him. "I can ground this entire fleet if I want to. Do you want to test me?" Miller slumped. He knew he was beaten. He took off his hat and placed it on the console. "Now," Jordan said, turning her attention to seat 1A. Priscilla Sterling was shrinking into her seat, trying to make herself as small as possible. She had put her sunglasses on, as if that would make her invisible. Jordan walked over to the suite. She leaned in, resting her hands on the armrests, trapping Priscilla in place. "Mrs. Sterling," Jordan said softly. "My food stamp budget seems to have bought the company. Isn't that funny?" Priscilla swallowed hard. I want to get off the plane. I want to leave." "Oh no." Jordan smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "We're just getting started. You see, I was looking at your husband's company, Sterling Logistics. You mentioned he was the CEO. Priscilla nodded quickly. "Yes." "Richard. He's very powerful." "He is," Jordan agreed. "Sterling Logistics handles all the catering and cargo transport for Vanguard Airways. It's a contract worth about $200 million a year." Jordan pulled out her phone. She dialed a number on speaker. "David," she said when the lawyer answered. "Yes, boss." "That vendor contract with Sterling Logistics. The one up for renewal next month. Yes, it's on your desk for signature. Shred it, Jordan said, staring directly into Priscilla's terrified eyes. Terminate the contract immediately and invoke the penalty clause for breach of conduct. Breach of conduct? David asked. Yes, Jordan said. The CEO's wife just assaulted the owner of the client company and delayed a flight by 45 minutes. I think that falls under reputational damage. Understood, David said. Terminating now. No, Priscilla screamed, leaping up. You can't. That will bankrupt him. That's his whole business. You should have thought about that, Jordan said, before you stole my seat. Jordan stood up and addressed the cabin. Mr. Henderson. Yes, Ms. Banks. Get this woman and her dog off my plane and ban her from Vanguard for life. If she ever sets foot in one of our terminals again, I want her arrested for trespassing. Immediately, ma'am. Wait, Priscilla shrieked as the police officers moved toward her. You can't do this. Do you know who I am? Yes, Jordan said, sitting down in seat 1A as Priscilla was hauled out of it. You're a passenger in economy, on a bus. As Priscilla was dragged, screaming down the aisle, clutching her Louis Vuitton bags, the entire economy cabin, who had heard everything through the open curtains, erupted into applause. Jordan looked at Todd, who was weeping in the galley corner, and the captain, who was packing his bag. Mr. Henderson, Jordan said, relaxing into the seat she had paid for. Find me a new crew. I have a meeting in London and I'm already late. By the time Jordan Banks landed at Heathrow Airport 7 hours later, the world had changed. She stepped off the plane refreshed after a nap in the seat that was rightfully hers to find her phone buzzing incessantly. It wasn't just emails from her team. It was everything. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok news alerts. The passenger in seat 2F. The businessman, who had remained silent during the altercation, had not been idle. He had recorded the entire interaction on his phone, hiding it behind his Wall Street Journal. He had uploaded the video just as the plane doors closed at JFK. The title was simple, but devastating. Racist Karen tries to kick black billionaire off her own plane. Watch the end. In the 7 hours Jordan was in the air, the video had garnered 42 million views. Jordan walked through Heathrow Customs flanked by her security team, who had met her at the gate. She didn't check the comments, but she knew what they said. The internet moves fast, and it is merciless. Meanwhile, back in New York, the sun was setting on the Sterling Empire. Priscilla Sterling was not in London. She was sitting on a plastic bench in the Port Authority, holding office at JFK, waiting for her husband to bail her out. She had been charged with criminal trespass and disorderly conduct. They had taken her fingerprints. They had taken her mugshot. They had even taken her shoelaces. But worst of all, they had taken her phone. She had no idea what was happening outside those walls. She assumed Richard would come in, yell at the police chief, threaten to sue the city, and they would be having dinner at Le Bernardin by 8:00 p.m. She was wrong. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a lawyer. It was Richard Sterling himself. But he didn't look like the powerful CEO she knew. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in a single afternoon. His tie was undone, his face was ashen, and his hands were shaking. "Richard," Priscilla cried out, standing up. "Finally, you have to sue them. That little girl, she ruined my flight. You need to call the airline and—" "Shut up," Richard whispered. It wasn't a scream. It was a hoarse, defeated rasp. Priscilla froze. "Excuse me. I said shut up." Richard roared, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I didn't do anything." Priscilla defended herself, clutching her pearls. "I was harassed by some hood rat who claimed she owned the airline." Richard pulled a tablet out of his briefcase and shoved it in her face. It was a live graph of Sterling Logistics' stock price. It was a vertical red line, plummeting straight down. "That hood rat is Jordan Banks," Richard spat. "She is the founder of Apex Group. She is worth $6 billion, and as of this morning she owns Vanguard Airways." Priscilla's mouth fell open. She really owns it. She owns it." Richard confirmed, his voice trembling with rage. "And because you decided to insult her, delay her flight and act like a maniac on camera, she triggered the reputational harm clause in our vendor contract. So we'll find other clients." "We don't have other clients, Priscilla," Richard screamed. "Vanguard was 80% of our revenue. The moment the news broke, our other two contracts, FedEx and DHL, called to suspend operations, pending an investigation into our corporate values. Our stock has dropped 60% in 4 hours. The board is meeting right now to vote on my removal." Priscilla stepped back, hitting the wall. "But it was just a seat." "No," Richard said, tears of frustration welling in his eyes. "It was my life's work, my father's company, and you destroyed it in 10 minutes because you couldn't stand sitting next to a black girl in a hoodie." He threw a crumpled piece of paper at her. It landed on the dirty floor. "What is this?" she asked. "Divorce papers," Richard said coldly. "My lawyers drafted them while I was on the way here." "Richard, you can't be serious." "I am securing what little assets I have left before you drag me into the gutter with you," Richard said, turning his back on her. "I posted your bail. But don't come home. I've had the locks changed." He walked out of the holding cell, leaving Priscilla Sterling alone in the silence, the realization of her new reality crashing down on her like a collapsing building. The next morning in London, Jordan Banks walked into the conference room of the Apex Group's UK headquarters. She was wearing a tailored cream suit, looking every inch the billionaire titan she was. Around the long glass table sat 12 men and women, her executive team. On the screen at the end of the room, a video conference link was open. It showed the boardroom of Sterling Logistics in New York. On the New York side, the mood was funeral. Richard Sterling was sitting at the head of the table looking defeated. His board of directors looked terrified. "Good morning," Jordan said cheerfully, setting her coffee down. "Or afternoon for you gentlemen in New York." "Ms. Banks," Richard said, his voice cracking. "Thank you for taking this call. I want to apologize profusely for my wife's behavior yesterday. It was abhorrent. It does not reflect the values of Sterling Logistics." "I'm sure it doesn't, Richard," Jordan said calmly. "But the problem is, she is a reflection of you. And you are the CEO. When the wife of the CEO uses racial slurs and false police reports against a client, that client tends to take it personally." "We have terminated her involvement with the company charities," Richard pleaded. "I have filed for divorce. We are doing everything we can." "That's a good start," Jordan said. "But the contract is still terminated. Vanguard Airways cannot do business with Sterling Logistics. My passengers wouldn't trust the food you cater." "Ms. Banks," one of the board members spoke up. "If you pull the Vanguard contract, Sterling Logistics will be insolvent by Friday. We have 5,000 employees. Innocent people will lose their jobs because of one woman's mistake." Jordan leaned forward. This was the moment. This was the real karma. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about power. "I know," Jordan said seriously. "I don't want 5,000 people to lose their jobs. I know what it's like to need a paycheck. Unlike Mrs. Sterling, I haven't forgotten where I came from." The room was silent. "So," Jordan continued, "I have a proposal. Apex Group is willing to acquire Sterling Logistics. Richard's head snapped up. Acquire us. Buy you out, Jordan corrected. Fully. At what price? Richard asked suspiciously. We were trading at $42 a share yesterday. Yes, yesterday. Jordan smiled. Today you're trading at 12. And once I officially announce the permanent cancellation of the contract, you'll be trading at 2. She slid a folder across the table to her lawyer, who held it up to the camera. I'm offering $4 a share, Jordan said. That's robbery, Richard shouted, slamming his fist on the table. That's a hostile takeover. It's a rescue mission. Jordan countered, her voice ice cold. You have 2 choices, Richard. Option A. You refuse. I pull the contract. The company goes bankrupt. Your stock becomes 0. You lose your house, your cars, and your legacy. Your employees lose their pensions. She took a sip of water. Option, you sell to me. I keep the employees. I rebrand the company, but there is one condition. What condition? The board chairman asked eagerly. They didn't care about Richard. They just wanted to save their own investments. Richard Sterling must resign immediately, Jordan said. With no severance package, no golden parachute, no stock options. You leave with nothing but the cash in your wallet. Richard looked around the room. He saw his board members nodding. He saw his allies looking away. He realized with a sickening thud in his stomach that he was alone. You can't do this, Richard whispered. My father built this company. And his son married the wrong woman, Jordan said. Clock is ticking, Richard. You have 60 seconds. The board chairman stood up. We accept. The board votes to accept the offer. Richard, you're out. Richard Sterling slumped in his chair, a broken man. He had lost his wife, his company, his fortune, and his name, all because his wife couldn't be polite to a stranger. Smart choice, Jordan said. David, send over the paperwork. As the screen faded to black, Jordan turned to her assistant. Now, she said, let's talk about the flight crew. Todd and Captain Miller, the assistant asked. HR has suspended them pending investigation. No investigation needed, Jordan said. The video is clear. Fire them. Standard termination. No. Jordan shook her head. Gross misconduct, and I want their names added to the FAA's no-fly internal list for operational risks. Make sure every airline in the alliance knows why they were fired. They shouldn't be serving coffee in a break room, let alone managing passengers at 30,000 feet. Jordan stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the London skyline. It had been 24 hours since she walked into the lounge at JFK. In that time, she had dismantled a CEO, acquired a logistics empire for pennies on the dollar, and cleaned house in her own company. But there was one loose end. One more thing, Jordan said. Yes, ma'am. Priscilla Sterling, Jordan said thoughtfully. She's going to need a job now that her husband is divorcing her, and he has no money to pay alimony. I suppose she will. Sterling Logistics. Sorry. Apex Logistics needs new janitorial staff for the warehouse in Queens. Jordan said, a small vindictive smile playing on her lips. Send her an application. Tell her we're an equal opportunity employer. 6 months is a long time in the news cycle, but in the lives of the people who boarded Flight 882 that rainy afternoon, it was an eternity. The viral video had eventually drifted out of the daily trending topics, replaced by election scandals and celebrity breakups. But the shockwaves it created had calcified into a new permanent reality. In the corporate world, the takeover of Vanguard Airways was studied in business schools as a masterclass in crisis management and rebranding. Jordan Banks didn't just buy the airline. She gutted it and rebuilt it from the bones up. The old grey and red logo of Vanguard, a symbol of delays and poor service, was scraped off every fuselage. In its place rose Apex Air, painted in a striking midnight blue with gold accents. But the changes weren't just cosmetic. Jordan had spent the last half-year tirelessly working out of the London and New York headquarters. She fired the entire legacy board of directors who had protected the old culture. She implemented a new AI-driven logistics system using her own tech that made Apex the most punctual airline in the hemisphere. But her most famous move was the open seat policy. Every single flight crew member, from the pilots to the baggage handlers, had to undergo rigorous anti-bias training. Jordan herself often flew economy on random routes wearing her signature hoodie just to ensure the standards were being met. She wasn't just a billionaire owner, she was a guardian. The stock price had tripled. Jordan Banks was no longer just a tech prodigy. She was an icon of modern industry proof that you could lead with empathy and still dominate the market. While Jordan soared, Captain Miller found himself sinking into the humid obscurity of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He sat in the waiting room of a third-rate cargo transport company, clutching a manila folder containing his flight logs. The air conditioner rattled noisily, struggling against the heat, much like Miller was struggling against his new reality. He was 60 years old. He should have been coasting toward a fat pension and a retirement home on a golf course. Instead, his pension had been decimated by the legal fees from the airline's negligence lawsuit, which they had pinned squarely on him. "Mr. Miller," a young man in a polo shirt called out. He looked to be about 25, young enough to be Miller's grandson. Miller stood up, straightening his cheap suit. "That's Captain Miller, actually. 30 years commercial experience." The young man didn't smile. He looked at the file, then back at Miller. He tapped his computer screen. "Yeah, we saw the resume. Impressive hours, but there's a flag here on your FAA file. Personnel conflict, high risk." "That was a misunderstanding," Miller said quickly, sweat beading on his forehead. "A political thing. Cancel culture, you know." The interviewer turned his monitor around. It wasn't the FAA file. It was a YouTube video with 40 million views. The thumbnail showed Miller yelling at a young black woman. "We fly cargo to South America," the young man said coldly. "But we still have standards, Mr. Miller. My boss saw this video. He said he wouldn't trust you to fly a kite, let alone a DC-10. We're not hiring." Miller walked out into the blinding Florida sun, the roar of a jet taking off from the nearby runway mocking him. He realized then that he would never touch the controls of an airplane again. He was grounded permanently. 3 states away in the grimy underbelly of the Port Authority bus terminal, Todd was learning the true definition of a service industry nightmare. The glamour of first class, the champagne, the hot towels, the power trip of controlling the cabin was a distant memory. Todd was now a baggage handler and ticket checker for a budget bus line that ran the graveyard shift from New York to Philadelphia. It was 2:00 a.m. The air smelled of diesel fumes and stale urine. "Hey, you, I said, handle with care," a passenger screamed at him. It was a man in a greasy tank top, shoving a duct-taped cardboard box into Todd's chest. "I'm doing my best, sir," Todd muttered, his back aching. He wasn't wearing a tailored uniform anymore. He was wearing a neon yellow safety vest over a stained polo shirt. "Well, your best sucks," the man spat. "Hurry up, I gotta get a seat." Todd watched the man push past him. He wanted to scream. He wanted to say, "I used to be a lead flight attendant. I used to decide who sat in 1A. But he swallowed the words. He knew that one more complaint would get him fired, and with the defamation lawsuit from Apex Air garnishing 40% of his wages. He couldn't afford to lose this job. He hefted a heavy suitcase, groaning as his shoulder popped, and realized that he was finally experiencing the exact level of respect he had shown Jordan Banks. In a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Queens, Richard Sterling sat in the dark. The electricity had been cut off an hour ago. He held his phone, the screen illuminating his hollow, unshaven face. He was looking at the stock market app, Apex Logistics. Formerly, Sterling Logistics was trading at an all-time high. The company his father had built, the company he had inherited, was more successful than ever now that he wasn't running it. When the hostile takeover happened, Richard thought he could bounce back. He thought he had friends. But he quickly learned that his friends were actually just people who liked his money. When the money vanished, so did the dinner invitations. He scrolled to his messages. The last one was from his divorce lawyer, alimony request denied by the judge. Mrs. Sterling has no income to claim against, and your assets are liquidated. You are on your own, Richard. He threw the phone across the room. It cracked against the wall. He had lost his wife, his company, his reputation, and his home. And the worst part, he knew deep down that he had enabled the behavior that caused it. He had spent years laughing at Priscilla's antics, calling her feisty, now that feistiness had cost him his life. The climax of this tragedy played out not in a boardroom, but in the frantic, greasy chaos of the Burger Palace food court at JFK Terminal 4. It was lunch rush. The noise was deafening. Order 54. Order 54. A woman's voice rasped, cracking with exhaustion. Priscilla Sterling wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. She was wearing a paper hat that barely contained her messy, unwashed hair. Her uniform was a size too big, stained with fryer grease. Her manicure was gone, replaced by chipped nails and red chapped skin from scrubbing vats of hot oil. She was the fry cook and the counter girl. It was the only job she could get. Her face was so well known in the corporate world as the Vanguard Karen that no office would let her in the building. "Excuse me," a customer said. "This table is filthy." "I'll get it," Priscilla mumbled. She grabbed a dirty rag and limped out from behind the counter. Her feet, swollen in cheap non-slip shoes, throbbed with every step. She reached the table and started scrubbing. She kept her head down. She had learned to avoid eye contact. If she looked people in the eye, they might recognize her. "You missed a spot," a calm voice said. Priscilla froze. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't rude. It was just familiar. She slowly lifted her head. Standing there bathed in the natural light of the terminal atrium was Jordan Banks. She looked like royalty. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere trench coat, oversized sunglasses, and holding a sleek leather briefcase. She was flanked by 2 security guards and an assistant, but she was looking directly at Priscilla. The silence between them was louder than the roaring jets outside. Priscilla felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Jordan, then down at her own grease-stained uniform, then back at Jordan. The contrast was brutal. The woman she had called trash was now owning the building while Priscilla was cleaning the floor of it. Priscilla's voice failed her. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot, humiliating tears. She braced herself. She waited for the insult. She waited for Jordan to pull out a phone and live stream this moment to the world. She waited for the final blow of karma. But Jordan didn't reach for her phone. She didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. She just looked at Priscilla with a profound, quiet pity. It was a look that said, "You are not worth my anger anymore. You are barely worth my memory." Jordan reached into her purse. Priscilla flinched, expecting a subpoena or a weapon. Instead, Jordan pulled out a crisp $50 bill. She placed it gently on the table Priscilla was scrubbing. "For the service," Jordan said softly. "It looks like a hard job. Try not to steal anyone's seat on the bus ride home." It was a subtle, devastating callback, a reminder of where this all began. Jordan turned on her heel, her coat swishing elegantly behind her. "Let's go," she said to her team. "We have a flight to catch. I believe the owner's suite is waiting." Priscilla stood there paralyzed as Jordan Banks walked away, disappearing into the exclusive Apex lounge. Priscilla looked down at the $50. It was more money than she had made in the last 3 days. She picked it up, her hands trembling violently. She wanted to rip it up. She wanted to scream. But she couldn't. She needed the money. She needed to buy groceries. She shoved the bill into her pocket, swallowed her pride, and went back to scrubbing the table, weeping silently into the smell of stale fries and regret. The karma hadn't just hit back. It had buried her. And the world kept spinning, leaving her behind in the dust. "You listen to me, you little brat. I don't care what your ticket says. People like you don't sit in seats like this." That was the last thing Mrs. Priscilla Sterling said before she made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she was kicking a young black girl out of first class. She didn't know that girl in the hoodie was the secret owner of the airline. Seconds later, the pilot announced, "We are grounding the aircraft." What follows is a story of arrogance, instant regret, and the most satisfying karma you will ever hear. And that is the story of how one act of arrogance brought down an entire dynasty. Priscilla Sterling thought her status gave her the right to treat people like dirt, but she forgot that in the real world, character is the only currency that matters. Jordan Banks proved that true power isn't about how loud you scream, but about how you carry yourself when the world tests you. What would you have done if you were in Jordan's shoes? Would you have forgiven Priscilla? Or did she get exactly what she deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story about real-life karma hitting back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.